Winter clung to London like a reluctant memory, pale frost silvering the carriage lamps, and dulling the glow of every gaslight along Grosvenor Square. Inside the Ashcombe ballroom, however, warmth gathered in glittering defiance, chandeliers blazing above a sea of silk and polished shoulders. Music unfurled, measured and elegant, yet beneath its civility pulsed the quieter rhythm of curiosity, calculation, and judgment. The season's most anticipated assembly had drawn the city's finest names, and among them stood a young woman, who had once been counted among its brightest hopes. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb lingered near a marble column, gloved hands folded with deliberate composure. Her gown, dove grey with a modest scattering of seed pearls, might have been chosen for invisibility. Only months before, she would have worn something brighter, something daring enough to invite admiration. Tonight she dressed as one hoping not to be noticed, though the attempt failed. Eyes found her nevertheless, drawn less by beauty than by the shadow trailing her reputation. A ripple of whispers traveled like a draught through the room. Fans lifted, lowered, lifted again. Eleanor kept her chin high, yet she could almost feel the words brushing her shoulders. Broken engagement. Ill-advised attachment. Unfortunate disappointment. Society did not shout its verdicts, it murmured them until they settled, inevitable as dust. At the far end of the ballroom, laughter rose, too bright, too pointed. Eleanor followed the sound before she could stop herself. Mr. Adrian Forsyth, once her promised future, guided a golden-haired debutante into a waltz. His smile held the easy confidence she remembered, though it no longer warmed her. The girl at his side blushed with triumph, unaware she moved through a triumph already rehearsed. Eleanor felt the faintest tightening in her throat, then steadied herself. She had rehearsed dignity as carefully as any dance. Two matrons paused nearby, their voices pitched low yet unmistakably audible. "Such a pity," murmured one, adjusting her bracelets. "I heard she expected an announcement before Christmas." The other sighed. "Expectations, my dear, are perilous when founded upon affection." Their glances slid toward Eleanor with polite regret sharpened by curiosity. She inclined her head as though acknowledging acquaintances, denying them the satisfaction of seeing her wounded. The orchestra shifted into a slower passage. Couples turned gracefully, skirts whispering across polished floors. No gentleman approached her. Invitations once offered freely now dissolved in hesitation. A young officer seemed about to bow, then reconsidered after catching another man's raised eyebrow. Eleanor pretended interest in the arrangement of camellias along the wall, counting petals to occupy her breathing. Her mother, stationed among a cluster of acquaintances, avoided looking directly at her. The older woman's smile flickered whenever conversation drifted too near the subject of engagements. Eleanor understood. Sympathy invited scrutiny, and scrutiny could be fatal. Still, the distance felt like another quiet abandonment. Mr. Forsyth's dance concluded. He escorted his partner toward the refreshments, passing within arm's reach of Eleanor. For an instant she believed he might acknowledge her. Instead he adjusted his cuff, gaze sliding past as though she were another piece of furniture. The deliberate omission struck harder than open disdain. She inhaled slowly, the scent of beeswax and roses suddenly cloying. The music swelled again. Laughter rippled. Somewhere, a lady exclaimed over a proposal rumored for the spring. Eleanor's composure wavered. She imagined leaving, summoning the carriage, retreating before pity deepened into spectacle. Yet departure would confirm defeat, and she had promised herself she would not flee. From the shadows near the tall windows, a figure observed. He stood apart from conversation, broad-shouldered in black, expression unreadable. Eleanor noticed him only in passing, registering an impression of stillness amid motion. Others seemed to avoid his orbit, though she did not know why. A fresh wave of whispers rose as Mr. Forsyth claimed another dance. The golden-haired girl laughed again, deliberately loud. Heat crept along Eleanor's cheeks. Pride battled fatigue. Humiliation pressed close, insistent. She felt suddenly that the room tilted toward her, every candle reflecting her solitude. Before courage dissolved entirely, she moved. The decision arrived like a spark, irrational, urgent. Crossing the polished floor, she approached the solitary gentleman by the windows. He watched her advance without surprise, dark eyes attentive. Up close, she sensed authority in the stillness, something formidable beneath restraint. She dipped a small, formal curtsy, voice barely above the orchestra's hush. "Will you dance with me? My ex is watching." The confession escaped before caution intervened, fragile and reckless. For a heartbeat he said nothing. Then his gloved hand extended, decisive, as though accepting a challenge. Across the ballroom, fans stilled, and conversation faltered, for Miss Eleanor Whitcomb had just invited the most feared duke to claim her in full view of London. Silence did not truly fall, yet the music seemed suddenly distant, as though the orchestra played behind glass. The gentleman inclined his head, grave, almost solemn, and drew her into the pattern of the waltz. His touch was steady, neither possessive nor hesitant, and Eleanor felt the curious sensation of being guided without being judged. Around them, conversation resumed in scattered fragments, each murmur edged with astonishment. She sensed Mr. Forsyth's gaze before she dared confirm it. The knowledge alone lent her spine an unfamiliar strength. They moved through the turning couples, her skirts brushing polished boots, his dark coat cutting a decisive line through the candlelight. Up close, she noticed a faint scar at his temple, half hidden by shadow, and the composure that suggested storms weathered without witnesses. "You have chosen a bold ally, Miss Whitcomb," he murmured, voice low, carrying the calm of command. She swallowed, unsure whether reassurance or warning colored his words. When the figures brought them near the center, the room seemed to narrow. Eleanor realized every step proclaimed defiance. Yet for the first time that evening, humiliation loosened its grip, replaced by something perilously close to relief. Still, as the waltz gathered momentum, a whisper followed them, the name of the man who held her, spoken with awe. Sparkle's broken heart violin. The whisper followed them like a silk ribbon trailing from a fan, curling through the ballroom until it tightened into a single name spoken with caution and awe. Eleanor felt it before she heard it clearly, sensed the sudden widening of space around them as couples adjusted their paths to avoid collision. The gentleman guiding her neither acknowledged the reaction nor altered his measured steps, yet the quiet command in his posture rendered the dance floor his dominion. "Your Grace," someone murmured as he passed, the title sliding between notes of the orchestra. Eleanor's pulse faltered. She lifted her eyes, searching his expression for confirmation, but his gaze remained attentive to the rhythm, as though the revelation mattered less than her footing. The realization struck with delayed force. She had appealed, in desperation, to a man whose reputation traveled ahead of him like thunder. "I fear I have placed you in difficulty," she whispered, breath unsteady. "You have placed yourself in clarity," he replied, tone calm, almost reflective. "Society merely dislikes seeing truth performed in public." The words steadied her, though their meaning lingered like an unsolved riddle. Around them, the waltz unfurled in widening circles. Eleanor felt the heat of scrutiny, yet something within her shifted. Humiliation, once suffocating, transformed into defiance tempered by curiosity. The Duke, she could no longer deny the title, guided her through each turn with precise courtesy, never allowing his hand to linger, never betraying impatience. His restraint, paradoxically, intensified the sense of protection. Across the room, Adrian Forsyth watched. His smile had vanished, replaced by a rigid politeness that failed to conceal irritation. The golden-haired debutante clung to his arm, whispering questions he answered with clipped nods. Eleanor caught the flicker of his displeasure and felt a small, surprising spark of triumph. The dance became more than escape. It became a declaration she had not known she wished to make. When the final notes softened, the Duke bowed. Applause fluttered politely, though it felt sharper, edged with speculation. Instead of releasing her immediately, he offered his arm. The gesture, formal yet unmistakably deliberate, sent another ripple through the assembly. Eleanor hesitated only a breath before accepting. To refuse would signal fear, and she sensed instinctively that he valued courage. He escorted her toward the refreshments, conversation stuttering in their wake. A matron's fan snapped shut. A young gentleman pretended sudden interest in the ceiling. Eleanor's mother stared, astonishment mingling with alarm. The Duke paused near the table, selecting a glass of lemonade and handing it to her, as though shielding her from the crowd's hunger. "You have endured an evening unkindly arranged," he said quietly. "Consider this my apology for participating in its theater." "You have rescued me from it," she answered, then flushed at her own candor. His mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile. "Rescue is a dangerous word, Miss Whitcomb. It implies obligation." "Then I shall call it kindness," she amended. "Kindness is rarer," he replied, and inclined his head before withdrawing, leaving her with the echo of composure. The absence of his presence felt immediate, as though a shield had been removed. Whispers intensified, some sympathetic, others gleeful. Eleanor returned to her mother, who grasped her hand with trembling fingers. "My dear, do you know whom you danced with?" she whispered. "I suspect I do now," Eleanor murmured. Her mother's expression wavered between pride and dread. The Duke of Ravensshire does not act without purpose. Purpose. The word lingered as the evening wound toward its conclusion. Adrian approached, bowing stiffly. "You seem well entertained," he said, tone light yet edged. "I am," she answered simply. His jaw tightened. One must be cautious with such alliances. Society observes. "Indeed," she replied, meeting his gaze. The conversation ended in brittle civility, but the balance between them had shifted irrevocably. Morning arrived pale and uncertain. Eleanor sat by the drawing-room window, replaying the night's events with alternating embarrassment and wonder. The house felt unusually quiet, as though waiting. A knock interrupted her thoughts. The footman entered bearing a long, narrow box wrapped in ivory paper. "For you, miss," he announced. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside lay a cluster of white winter roses, their petals luminous against dark leaves. No card accompanied them, only a wax imprint stamped with a crest she recognized from the ballroom whispers. The scent rose softly, clean and unexpected, like snow touched by sunlight. Her mother hovered behind her. "From him?" Eleanor nodded, unsure whether to smile or fear the implication. The roses seemed both comfort and provocation, a silent acknowledgement that the previous night had not been imagined. She arranged them in a vase, watching their reflection tremble in the glass. By afternoon, news traveled faster than carriages. A caller hinted that the Duke had been seen inquiring after her health. Another mentioned that invitations to certain gatherings might be reconsidered. Sympathy sharpened into speculation. Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, reputation reshaping itself around a single dance. Days later, during a promenade in Hyde Park, she glimpsed him again. He approached without haste, hat in hand, as though greeting an equal. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, voice low yet unmistakable. "Your Grace," she replied, heart unsteady. "I trust the roses arrived intact," he added. "They did," she answered, surprised he spoke of them openly. He inclined his head, gaze steady. "Then I hope you understand that I do not send tokens lightly." The words lingered long after he moved on, leaving Eleanor aware that the scandal had only begun to unfold, and that each gesture from him would carry weight enough to alter her fate. That evening, another envelope arrived, heavier than before, sealed with the same crest. Inside lay a simple card bearing a single line in firm script. I would request the honor of speaking with you, where whispers cannot intrude. The message contained no location, no time, only intent. Eleanor held the card, pulse quickening, aware that acceptance might deepen scandal beyond recall, yet refusal felt equally impossible. Outside, twilight gathered, and she sensed the fragile boundary between caution and courage dissolving. Somewhere in London, the Duke had extended another invitation, and the choice to answer it promised either redemption or ruin. Rain arrived without ceremony, a thin silver veil descending over London, as though the sky sought discretion. Eleanor watched the drops gather upon the drawing-room window, each bead trembling before surrendering to gravity. The card from the Duke rested on her lap, its restrained script still echoing in her thoughts. Where whispers cannot intrude. The promise felt both daring and protective, an invitation not merely to conversation but to truth. She chose caution disguised as propriety. Her mother was informed she would walk in the small public garden adjoining their street, a place respectable enough to silence suspicion. Yet as Eleanor stepped into the afternoon's muted light, she sensed she was already crossing an invisible threshold. The air smelled of damp stone and early blossoms. Carriages passed with subdued rattles, their occupants peering through fogged glass. The garden lay nearly empty, its gravel paths darkened by rain. At the far end stood a modest pavilion, its ironwork traced with climbing ivy. Beneath its shallow roof, a solitary figure waited. The Duke of Ravensshire turned as she approached, removing his hat with deliberate courtesy. Raindrops clung to the brim, sliding down like hesitant confessions. "You came," he said, as though the outcome had not been certain. "I believed you wished for clarity," she replied, folding her hands to still their trembling. "And you?" he asked quietly. "I wished for understanding." The rain intensified, drumming softly upon the pavilion's roof. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt weighted, not uncomfortable, but charged with possibilities unspoken. Eleanor studied him more closely than propriety allowed. Without the brilliance of chandeliers, his features seemed less formidable, though no less commanding. There was weariness about his eyes, a restraint suggesting long acquaintance with solitude. "I regret the circumstances that forced your appeal," he began. "No lady should need to ask a stranger for protection." "I did not ask for protection," she said gently. "Only a dance." "And yet," he replied, "I could not offer less." She felt the warmth of those words, unexpected and disarming. "You have altered my standing, whether you intended it or not." "Society's judgments are fickle," he answered. "They condemned you before I spoke. Now they merely invent new explanations." "Does that not trouble you?" she asked. "It troubles me only when it wounds someone undeserving." His gaze softened. "You bore their cruelty with composure. I admired that." The confession startled her. "You noticed me before the ball." "I have observed you at several gatherings," he admitted. "You listened more than you spoke." "It is a rare habit." Eleanor felt color rise to her cheeks. "Observation is often safer than participation." He inclined his head. "I know something of that choice." The rain blurred the garden into muted watercolor. Beyond the pavilion, the world seemed distant, reduced to shifting silhouettes. Eleanor sensed the intimacy of isolation, as though the storm granted permission for honesty. "May I ask," she ventured, "why you are considered so formidable?" A faint smile touched his mouth. "Because I do not pretend enthusiasm where none exists. People fear silence more than anger." "And do you fear anything?" she asked before caution intervened. "Yes," he said after a pause. "The possibility of indifference." The admission struck her more deeply than any dramatic declaration. You do not appear indifferent, she murmured. Not when injustice is performed so carelessly, he replied. Your former fiancé displayed a cruelty I found intolerable. She lowered her gaze. It is easier to endure disappointment than humiliation. Yet you endured both, he said softly. The gentleness in his voice unraveled her composure. I believed my future settled, she confessed. When it dissolved, I discovered how quickly affection becomes spectacle. I felt diminished. You were never diminished, he answered. Only misjudged. Their eyes met, and the air seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor sensed the fragile boundary between gratitude and something more perilous. You speak as though you know me, she said. I know resilience when I see it, he replied. And I recognize courage disguised as politeness. Footsteps sounded faintly along the path, then faded as passers-by hurried past the rain. The interruption reminded her of vulnerability. If we are seen, she began. I will escort you openly, he assured her. Your reputation shall not suffer further. The promise carried quiet authority. He removed his coat, draping it over her shoulders with careful distance. The warmth surprised her, smelling faintly of cedar and rain. You will be cold, she protested. I am accustomed to weather, he said. You are not. They stepped from the pavilion together, moving slowly along the glistening path. The rain softened, yet the world remained hushed. Eleanor felt sheltered, not merely by the coat, but by his presence. The garden gate appeared sooner than she wished, signaling the return of propriety. He paused. Miss Whitcomb, I hope you will not consider my interest intrusive. I consider it reassuring, she admitted. Then I shall continue, he said, voice low. With discretion. He bowed, allowing her to depart first. As she reached her door, she discovered a folded paper tucked within the coat's lining. Inside, a single line appeared, written in the same measured hand, You deserve to be seen without whispers. Eleanor pressed the note to her heart, sensing that what had begun as rescue was quietly becoming something far more dangerous, hope. The invitation arrived embossed in gold, its elegance almost defiant in its simplicity. Eleanor traced the lettering with cautious fingers, aware that every appearance now carried consequence. The Duchess of Halcomb's evening assembly promised music, card tables, and the inevitable scrutiny of those who measured reputations as carefully as dowries. She sensed that attending would invite judgment, yet absence might suggest fear. The Duke's note still rested hidden among her keepsakes, its quiet assurance echoing whenever doubt threatened. Hope, once fragile, had begun to demand courage. When she entered the Halcombe ballroom, candlelight cascaded across mirrored walls, multiplying every movement. Conversations softened, then sharpened again as guests recognized her. Some offered polite bows, others watched openly, curiosity outweighing restraint. Eleanor felt the familiar tension gather, yet she held her posture steady. She had not come merely to endure. She had come because retreat would surrender the fragile dignity she had begun to reclaim. Her mother lingered beside her, whispering cautious encouragement. Remember, composure is your ally. Eleanor nodded, though her attention drifted across the room. He had not yet arrived. The absence unsettled her more than she expected, as though she had grown accustomed to the quiet certainty of his presence. Without it, whispers seemed louder. Adrian Forsyth approached before she could steady her thoughts. His expression carried strained politeness, the confidence of former familiarity replaced by brittle irritation. Miss Whitcomb, he said, bowing. You appear remarkably composed. I endeavor to be, she replied. I trust you understand the impression created by recent attentions, he continued, voice lowered. Society assumes much. Society always assumes, she answered evenly. His gaze hardened. You encourage speculation. It reflects poorly. Upon whom? She asked softly. The question unsettled him. He hesitated, then forced a smile. Upon all concerned. She inclined her head, unwilling to argue. Yet the exchange left a tremor beneath her calm. She realized how easily her renewed confidence could fracture under public scrutiny. The orchestra began a waltz, couples forming with graceful anticipation. No invitation came. Eleanor stood beside a column, feeling once more the edge of isolation. Then the doors opened. Conversation faltered as the Duke of Ravensshire entered. His attire was severe black, unadorned yet unmistakably distinguished. He paused only briefly, surveying the room, before his gaze settled upon her. The moment stretched, silent and electric. He crossed the floor without haste, yet every step seemed to command attention. Miss Whitcomb, he said, bowing. May I claim this dance? She sensed the room leaning forward. Accepting would invite speculation, refusing might suggest retreat. If you wish, she answered, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. He offered his arm. As they joined the waltz, murmurs rippled outward. The dance felt different from the first, less impulsive, more deliberate. His hand guided her with measured confidence. You appear troubled, he observed quietly. I fear the consequences of boldness, she admitted. Boldness often invites truth, he replied. Do you regret trusting me? No, she said at once, surprised by her certainty. His expression softened. Then let us proceed without regret. They turned beneath the chandeliers, the music swelling. Eleanor felt steadied by his presence, yet aware of the scrutiny intensifying. Adrian stepped forward as the dance concluded, his interruption abrupt. Your Grace, he said, voice controlled, might I speak? The Duke inclined his head. Briefly. Adrian addressed Eleanor, though his words aimed at the audience. I must caution you, Miss Whitcomb. Appearances compromise reputations. One might misunderstand your association. Eleanor felt color rise, humiliation threatening to return. Before she could answer, the Duke spoke. Mr. Forsyth, I do not misunderstand my own intentions. The calm authority in his tone silenced nearby conversations. Adrian stiffened. Intentions are not always evident. Mine are honorable, the Duke replied. I would advise restraint before questioning them. The exchange hovered between civility and confrontation. Eleanor sensed the room holding its breath. Adrian forced a bow, retreating with visible frustration. The Duke turned back to her, expression composed yet resolute. You should not bear such insinuations alone, he said. You have already done more than kindness requires, she murmured. Kindness is insufficient, he answered softly. There are moments when clarity must be declared. The words lingered, stirring both hope and apprehension. Music resumed, yet Eleanor felt detached from its rhythm. He escorted her toward the terrace doors, where cooler air drifted inward. Candlelight flickered against the glass, reflecting their silhouettes. Miss Whitcomb, he said, voice low, I would not risk your reputation without purpose. She met his gaze, heart unsteady. And that purpose? He hesitated, as though measuring the weight of disclosure. Is not yet ready for public declaration. The restraint intensified her anticipation. Then I must trust you, she replied. You must trust yourself, he corrected gently. You have already shown courage. They returned to the ballroom, yet the atmosphere had shifted. Guests watched openly now, speculation ripening into certainty. Eleanor felt the fragile balance between scandal and vindication tightening. The Duke paused beside her, his expression thoughtful. This evening will not quiet rumors, he said. I no longer wish them quieted, she admitted, surprising herself. Then prepare, he replied softly. Because before the night ends, I may give them reason to speak openly. The promise settled between them like a spark awaiting flame, and Eleanor realized that whatever he intended would transform whispers into something irrevocable. Moonlight settled across the terrace like a pale benediction, softening the clamor of the ballroom into distant music. Eleanor stepped beyond the doors, seeking breath, her pulse still echoing the Duke's promise. Cool air brushed her cheeks, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked stone. She clasped her hands, aware that hope had grown too bright to hide, yet still fragile enough to shatter. Behind her, laughter flickered, but the terrace remained momentarily deserted, a quiet stage awaiting decision. Footsteps approached with measured certainty. The Duke of Ravensshire emerged from the glow, closing the distance without haste. You wished for clarity, he said, voice low. I fear I have delayed it too long. She turned toward him, studying the gravity in his expression. Candlelight from within outlined his profile, revealing restraint strained by determination. I am listening, she replied, though her heart beat so loudly she wondered if he heard. He rested his hands along the stone balustrade, gaze fixed on the gardens below. I have lived most of my life avoiding spectacle, he began. Power invites expectation, and expectation breeds false affection. I learned early to distrust admiration. His words unfolded without flourish, each syllable deliberate. Yet when I saw you endure humiliation without bitterness, I recognized something rare. You did not seek attention, only dignity. I found myself unwilling to let that dignity be crushed. Eleanor felt warmth and apprehension mingle. You offered kindness, she said softly. I offered protection first, he corrected. But protection became respect, and respect, he paused, turning to meet her eyes. Respect became attachment. The simplicity of the confession unsettled her more than dramatic rhetoric. Silence stretched between them, filled with possibility. I do not speak lightly, he continued. Every gesture, I have made risks your reputation. I would not risk it without intent to honor you completely. Her breath caught. You mean? I mean, he said, steady, that I wish to ask for your hand, not from impulse, but from conviction. The terrace seemed to narrow, the world contracting to his voice. Eleanor felt the echo of past disappointment, fear whispering caution. Society will claim you act from pity, she murmured. They will say you rescue what is broken. I rescue nothing, he replied. I choose. The firmness of his tone dissolved her doubt. You were never broken, Miss Whitcomb. You were merely denied loyalty. I offer mine freely. Emotion surged, unexpected and fierce. You restore what I believed lost, she admitted. Yet I fear the cost to you. My reputation thrives on indifference, he said with faint humor. It will survive affection. He extended his hand, not touching her, but inviting. Will you accept a future built on honesty rather than approval? Eleanor looked at his hand, then at the ballroom beyond. Faces waited there, ready to judge. She realized that declining would preserve caution, but extinguish hope. Accepting would invite scrutiny yet promise belonging. Slowly, she placed her gloved fingers within his. Yes, she whispered. I will. The word seemed to still the night. Relief softened his expression, transforming severity into warmth. He bowed slightly, as though sealing a pact. Then we must end speculation with truth, he said. Come with me. He offered his arm, and she accepted, feeling both tremor and triumph. Together they re-entered the ballroom, the music swelling as though anticipating revelation. Conversation faltered as they crossed the floor. Eleanor sensed every gaze, yet fear receded beneath determination. Adrian stood among a cluster of guests, his expression tightening. The Duke halted near the center, raising his voice just enough to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, calm yet unmistakable, "I ask your indulgence." Silence gathered, expectant. He turned to Eleanor, his posture formal. "Miss Whitcomb has honored me with her confidence," he continued. "I now seek the greater honor of her companionship for life." A collective murmur swept the room. Eleanor felt heat rise, but his presence steadied her. "She has accepted," he concluded, "and I trust you will join me in wishing her happiness." Shock yielded to applause, hesitant at first, then swelling. Her mother pressed a handkerchief to her lips, tears shining. Adrian's gaze dropped, defeat evident. Eleanor realized the narrative had shifted entirely, whispers transformed into admiration. The Duke inclined his head to the orchestra. "One more dance," he murmured to her. "Let them see what courage creates." The waltz began, slower and more intimate. They moved through the candlelit space, no longer shielded by secrecy. Eleanor felt lightness replace lingering shame. "You have changed everything," she said. "You changed it the moment you asked me to dance," he replied. They turned gracefully, the room blurring into warmth and applause. Eleanor sensed not judgment, but acceptance, fragile yet genuine. As the music faded, he drew her to a gentle halt, their hands still joined. The chandeliers glowed above them, reflecting a future unimagined hours before. She met his gaze, aware that humiliation had led her here, to dignity reclaimed and affection openly declared. Around them, society resumed its motion, yet she felt anchored by certainty, the waltz of redemption complete. Soft conversation resumed, yet the atmosphere carried a transformed gentleness, as though approval had replaced curiosity. The Duke guided her toward her mother, who embraced her with trembling pride, whispering gratitude she scarcely heard. Eleanor felt the magnitude of change settle slowly, like dawn unfolding across dark water. The man beside her had not merely defended her, he had chosen her publicly, offering everything. She understood that courage would continue beyond this night. He leaned closer, voice meant only for her. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin quietly, away from spectacle, but never from truth." She nodded, aware their future would require patience as well as passion. When he released her hand, then reclaimed it, she sensed the promise renewed. The orchestra struck a final chord, applause echoing. Eleanor lifted her gaze, no longer fearing the crowd, certain humiliation had ended in triumph. At last quietly,